Right now, Education Minister Stephen Lecce is speaking to reporters after that heated debate. Let's listen live.
To be in school.
So you won't negotiate unless they remove their strike mandate?
We're always willing to talk to the unions. We spoke with them yesterday, but we were really hoping that they would withdraw their strike vote. Their strike on Friday that will affect 2 million kids. They have not done that. As you know, they are confirming that they will proceed with the strike, and I think that's really unfair. The reason why we introduced legislation is because the worst case scenario is that they proceed with the strike even after we offered a better deal. And that seems to be their intention today. And they had a choice before them. They, of course, could have said, we will withdraw the strike vote to permit continued negotiating, to try to get to a voluntary settlement. Now, we'll always be ready and willing to work with any union to get a deal, but we will not accept a strike this Friday or any day. And I believe the overwhelming majority of parents insist that their kids are in school. They understand that there's a debate between the parties. They don't think their kids should be the casualty, and I frankly agree.
This legislation you're ramming.
Minister, are you really going to fine individual members $4,000 each? Like, I mean, now we've got a situation where the school boards are shutting down the schools,
right?
So that members can't go into work even if they wanted to. Is there any fairness in the $4,000?
Well, look, we really hope that the penalty elements of the legislation will not have to be used. My hope is that common sense will prevail, that the union will do the reasonable act of withdrawing the threat of a strike that will impact millions of kids after an incredible disruption that has affected their lives. And so I believe and I hope with the 36 hours between now and then, they will withdraw their strike as we've urged them to do so that we can get back to the business of getting a voluntary deal that protects kids and keeps them in the classroom.
This legislation that you're ramming,
Won't fining people $4,000 each reflect really poorly on your government? Is that something that the optics that you want out in the public?
I'm cognizant that back to work legislation has always included these types of provisions. What I also know is that what I think parents and the public are quite concerned about is the idea that there would be another strike after 2 years of a pandemic, after strikes that just happened 3 years ago in Ontario. I think that is a deep concern for parents of this province who've seen their kids set back because of a great deal of regression in mental and physical health, social, emotional health, and academics. And so my hope is they will withdraw their strike. We're urging them to withdraw the strike and focus on getting a deal that all parties can live with that keep kids in the classroom. But to date, Randy, right now, the union has reaffirmed their commitment to a strike, and I believe that is entirely unfair to millions of children, and thus the government has no choice but to pursue the legislation. In the absence of moving this legislation through the House on an expedited basis to get there by Thursday, we seek to avoid a strike on Friday. And I believe that is the obligation of a responsible government to say, look, enough. There is a debate. We can have that debate, but kids shouldn't be the casualty of the union's disagreement on pay and benefits.
This legislation, when was it drafted?
The legislation was concluded, I think around the 17-day mark, when they initiated their actions or intention to bring us to a strike. They initiated a 17-day no board period. That's when the government had to start thinking about backup options if, of course, the union decided to proceed with their 5-day strike notice. When they did, the government moved quickly, introduced legislation on Monday with the intention of passing it Thursday. All of this was designed in response to the threat the union put themselves with footing. Originally 17 days, Richard, and then it moved to 5, of course, on Sunday when and I want to be clear on this, when the union alone on Sunday, before the discussion of legislation, even the contemplation of legislation when it came to communicating that to the union, before that, they made a decision. They invoked the 17 days, then they got to 5 days, and they put the province on a footing to a strike for this Friday. And then that night, we said, come in, let's talk. Because you know that the options governments of different parties have used in the past when these types of threats happen. So let's try to avoid that. Let me offer you more money. Let me maintain your benefit program that is perhaps amongst the best in the nation. Let me maintain the 131 days of sick leave, 11 of which are at 100%, 121 of the short-term disability at 90%. Let's maintain all of those entitlements and increase your pay 2.5 points more than we offered originally. And they alone decided that the prudent step, for whatever reason, is to put the province on a footing to a strike. And therefore, what option does the government have other than to bring forth legislation that ensures these kids, your kids, are in school on Friday. I mean, honestly, I'm open to an alternative option. We urge the union to bring forth a proposal that withdraws the strike. But in the absence of the union withdrawing the threat, not a threat now, the realization of a strike, as school boards, as confirmed in Toronto and across the province, are closing, we have to act with legislation.
Minister, has CUPE put a counter offer forward since the 11%? Like, since you went back to them with 2.5, have they come back with another offer?
So yesterday, just to demonstrate the point that we've stood ready to negotiate with this union, notwithstanding the legislation that is before them, because we were hoping they would come to, frankly, their senses on a more realistic offer, one that withdraws the threat of strike. Because I just want to be very clear, the reason why we introduced the legislation in the first place is because the union has decided to put the province on a 5-day footing to a strike. Yesterday, we were told by the media we'd get a pass at 10 a.m. Then lunchtime rolled around. I was able to see the leadership on, in media and rallies, et cetera. At 10 p.m. last night, the government received a pass from the union through the mediator, and of course, we confirmed it, heard it on the media. And what that pass does not include in any way is the commitment to take the strike off the table.
But is it a lower offer than the, I mean, are they offer, is their counter proposal lower and closer to your 2.5 than
I can't speak to the proposal only because, as I understand through the private mediator, the request of both parties is confidence. I'll let the union speak for their, should they choose to violate that principle. All I'm simply saying is we are at the table with the aim of getting a voluntary deal to avoid a strike. And we urge the union, through the private mediator, Mr. Kaplan, who've used with this union just 3 years ago, we said, remove the strike threat. Why is there a strike on Friday if we're trying to have, through a private mediator, good faith negotiations to lead to a voluntary settlement that avoids all of this? But that option isn't on the table today. It is regrettable we are here because I don't think we should be here. I mean, I want to be very clear. This is the last resort option for any government, the former government and this government. But in the absence of action and leadership, doing what is difficult but frankly necessary to provide stability, we're not going to tolerate Friday and next week, when the legislature doesn't sit, potentially multi-day strike on kids. Honestly, I say this often, but I mean it. At what point does a government say enough? And we're simply saying with strong conviction that the kids have paid a price of this pandemic, and someone has to stand up for them. And I appreciate this is difficult on the members, on the leadership, on the parents, and on the kids. And I respect our members, and I meaningfully urge them to urge their leaders to return to meaningful discussions that remove the threat of a strike. And if we do that, we can get to a deal that averts all of this and keeps kids in the classroom, please.
You're not going to consider what's actually in the counteroffer unless they withdraw the threat of a strike.
The union needs to take the strike off the table. How can we negotiate? I mean,
you're not going to look at details or sort of consider it on a point-by-point basis.
To be fair, we were at the table yesterday through our negotiating team was present with the private media. We always will be. I want to be very clear. We're always open to listening. We're always open to hearing proposals. What we're asking for, what we're insisting upon on behalf of the people of this province is that they take Friday's threat off the table. I mean, that is not a preposterous ask of the union. It's fairly quite common and reasonable. Take the threat off the table and let's talk. We are talking, but let's get to a deal is the next step of the logic. And unfortunately, the union has insisted upon, and I'll get to it, they have insisted upon proceeding with this strike that impacts so many. And I think that's really unfair to kids.
Last question. Minister, I'm going to get two here. Minister, can't CUPE just say to you, well, we won't negotiate with you unless you take your, constitutionally breaking legislation off the table? I mean, aren't we at an impasse then? If you're telling them to withdraw their strike, they could tell you, well, you take the legislation off the table. Where do we go from there?
If legislation is taken off the table, the union can proceed with the strike on Friday if a deal isn't met or achieved through the private mediator. And I ask the parents in this room and those that are watching today if they want to take that chance. Like, what you're asking is that the government unilaterally withdraw the legislation, which then removes our capacity to mandate kids in school on Friday. And I don't think that is prudent, nor do I think that is fair. I think the first step of the negotiations and good faith is remove the threat of a strike that's not, impacting government. It's impacting the people we all serve, including the members who I know in their heart love their kids, serve their schools, work very hard. We celebrate their work. We want them to show up on Friday and make a difference for our kids. Pardon me, Jeff.
Can you explain that point? So labor relations works like this, right? Unions can strike. That's their leverage. If they can't strike, why negotiate with them at all? I mean, you're not. You're going to impose it.
We have negotiated, Jeff,
will you not
throughout this
tolerate a
entire...
strike ever? Like, will you use Section 33 to take the strike off the table for secondary school teachers, elementary teachers? Like, where does this end?
We've simply made clear, after 2 extraordinary and difficult years, realizing the data points on learning loss, on mental health, on physical health, and social emotional regression, given the extraordinary circumstance, because this is not normative times. Like, would we all agree on that premise? This is not a normal time for kids. This isn't 1995 or 98 or 1990 when there were localized strikes on the New Democrats or the Liberals of McGuinty. This is a different time. These kids are in a different place, and they need leadership to stand up to make sure they're in school. And that's what we're doing in this specific case with CUPE under the premise that kids should be in school. Thank you all.